Indigo Falls. Reactions by CrazyWords. Only one's coming out, I said into the microphone, looking through the glossy bulletproof one-way mirror in the small white-walled room. In there, Subject 7 and Subject 8 sitting in steel chairs across from one another. On the metal table in between them, there was a revolver with a single bullet. They just stared. 7 at 8 and 8 at the gun. The door was locked so they couldn't get out. They still were just staring and twitching. Someone get the ball rolling? I spoke to my colleagues with my hand covering the microphone. We discussed what we needed to do. We knew we couldn't just let them out. We still needed data on human reaction between the test subjects and regular people. Deciding what needed to be done, I started to speak. If one of you doesn't die in the next 5 minutes, the chamber— Bang! I watched as the bullet hit the mirror, and the small crack formed. He reloaded and took another shot, when you could barely hear the acute clicking of the gun going off without any ammo. Okay, you asked for it, assholes! My hand slammed the gas button. Damn it! My voice booming in the small lab. My hand over the mic again. This happens too much! While I shouted, the gas chamber quickly filled with gas. Afterward, we had the janitorial staff remove the bodies to be cremated. I pressed the intercom. Next! My voice still sounded angry. Calling in the next subjects, I checked which pair we were on. Pair 10, I read off my paper. Ah, shit, less subjects. Those simple words sent us all into dismay. We'd not gained enough information to hand to the government. We needed more data. When the last ones came in, we did the process. Sure enough, Subject 10 shot 9, but only after being threatened with being gassed. We talked, and decided. Look, everyone. We need 2 volunteers. No hands went up. In our small lab room, the silence was deafening. Until one hand went up. Our oldest member, 2 days from retirement. There was one gasp, but others knew why he volunteered to die. He hated Indigo Falls. I will, I shouted, knowing I might get promoted if I killed the old man. As I walked into the room, I simply looked at my shoes, and watching my small name tag bounce against my upper chest. I knew I was going to kill someone. I couldn't die now. I was newlywed. Tomorrow, when they ask where the old man is, I'll tell them that he had an accident with the gun. Maybe I'll tell them suicide. I snapped out of my train of thought and looked around. I saw that we had made it to the table. The revolver was lying on its side, in all of its murderous glory. Sit down. The loudspeaker echoed through my ears. It bugged me that someone was speaking into my microphone. I didn't even know why. I sat down, but I felt the anger growing inside of me. I realized that while I thought that it wasn't natural, the feeling that I was going to kill someone, my body felt like it was preparing for trauma. The loudspeaker boomed. You may begin. Those 3 words made me want to puke. I just looked at the old man, his age sickening me to my very core. He should have died long ago. I picked up the gun and wailed, Die, you bastard! And shot him. I watched as the bullet tore through his head and the blood flowed like wine. You may exit. The loudspeaker still yelling. I heard the latch slide back. I slowly walked out like nothing had happened. I went home and had my wife wash the blood off my lab coat. I slept. I woke up, did my routines, and went back to work. Indigo Falls, Josephine, by Underscorre. It had been 6 days since the young man had gone into the building, and Josephine was beginning to get worried. For as long as she could remember, she had spent her days sitting, gazing out of her shop window, watching the comings and goings of the world that lay outside, separated from her by a flimsy shop window. As an 82-year-old running a shop that was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, she didn't have much better to do. She noticed whenever someone new came into town, and she'd certainly noticed the young man. He was about 28, 6 feet tall, with short black hair and a chiseled face that was remarkably pleasant to look at. 6 days ago, he'd gotten off the bus at the town's one bus stop and gone into the shop calling itself Just Jim's Cafe. He hadn't come out since. Josephine didn't generally worry about such trivial things. These disappearances were actually pretty common in town and had been happening for years. But recently they'd been happening more and more, and Josephine was beginning to wonder why. She hadn't left her shop for 4 years. Her neighbor, Sid Morgan, had been bringing her food for a very long time, in exchange for a significant chunk of her already dwindling bank account. However, the feeling of wind rushing across her face as she stepped out of the door was incredible. Slowly, Josephine began to stumble across the road, cursing how slow her legs seemed to have become. She felt odd. Although no one was about, she felt as though she was being watched. Eventually, she reached the shop. It was tacky, falling apart, effectively in disrepair. She was hesitant to go in. At her age, one grew very cautious over things like this. Still, the curiosity ate at her like a virus, willing her to go in. Carefully, she pushed open the door, walking inside. It was dimly lit, probably due to the grime that seemed to cover the entirety of the place, blocking out the sun. The place was empty, except for a man loitering at the counter, who seemed to be deliberately avoiding talking to her.
Hello?
She asked nervously. He gave a grunt of recognition, although he still seemed to be avoiding any kind of confrontation with her. She walked towards him, regretting what she was doing even more with every step.
I'm looking for a young man. He's about 6 feet tall, dark hair. You wouldn't have happened to seen him, would you?
The man stopped what he was doing and looked up at her.
Can't say I have, he responded in a gruff voice.
Are you sure?
Josephine asked.
It's just I'm sure I saw him come in here a few days ago.
Quite sure, the man responded. He had suddenly become nervous and seemed to want to change the subject. Would you like to order anything?
I guess I'll have a coffee,
Josephine said, and sat at the table near the window. As the coffee machine dispensed a thick, black substance she could only assume was coffee into a cup, the entire building seemed to groan. Still, the steaming liquid that was then brought to her table smelled pretty good, so she drank it up. She sat drinking for about 3 minutes before she began to feel strange. Her head was pounding. She felt as though she were about to throw up.
Excuse me?
She croaked.
Do you have an aspirin?
The man didn't respond. Her vision began to blur and she fell to her knees. As she hit the floor, she caught a faint glimpse of a small army of uniformed SWAT officers charging into the building. She overheard one of them shouting something into a walkie-talkie. Yep, she's out. Take her to the pen. Josephine didn't remember much from then on. After all, lobotomies don't generally permit such rational thought. She did remember one thing, though, before she died, and that was fear. Josephine thought she'd seen quite a bit in her lifetime, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw in the pen. At first glance, if you were far enough away, you might have thought it was just a tall, muscular man, but when you got closer, you could see it had become clearly something far different. Its skin was covered with huge tumorous growths that almost seemed to pulsate. Its face hung off from its skull, half of it clinging on by just a single fleshy strand. If Josephine had possessed the capacity for logical thought, she probably would have screamed, not because of the gruesome sight in front of her, but because of the remarkable resemblance it bore to a young man aged around 28 with short, black hair and a remarkably chiseled face. The same young man she could have sworn she'd seen going into Just Jim's cafe about a week ago. Of course, she wouldn't have screamed for long. Those who have been torn limb from limb aren't well known for their conversational skills.